Montana Territory. Late spring of 1878, the wind carried the scent of pine sap and wet earth, and Rosalene Carter held tight to the side rail of the wagon as it rattled down the muddy trail toward a town she had never seen, to marry a man she had never met. Her gloves were damp with sweat, her travel dress wrinkled from 4 days on the road. She still wore the small cameo her mother had given her, even though her mother's last words had been a whispered warning: "Be careful with strangers who promise too much." Rosalene had come west to marry a rancher named Walter Griggs. His letters had been stiff but polite, promising a home, stability, and even 2 children he had from a previous marriage. She had answered with honesty: 22, orphaned, no money, but a willingness to work and be a good wife. His reply came fast: "Come. We need you."
So she came.
But when she stepped down from the wagon in the town of Dry River, Walter was not waiting with flowers or even a handshake. Instead, 2 rough men with sun-scorched faces grabbed her arms. "You're the Carter girl?" one of them asked. "Yes, she started, but the other man had already lifted her trunk from the wagon bed. "Walter sent us." "He's waiting," the first man said. They didn't take her to a house. Not to a ranch. Not even to a general store. They took her to the back of a saloon. She fought, of course. She screamed. But there were no sheriffs in Dry River, only men who looked away when they didn't want trouble. And Walter Griggs, if he ever existed, never came. By sundown, Rosalene was locked in a room above the saloon, her trunk already rifled through, her letters gone. The madam, a hard-faced woman named Myrtle, told her plain and cold, "You were sold, girl. Walter got his cut. You belong to me now."
Rosalene didn't cry.
Not that night. She stared at the wall until morning. 3 days passed. She refused food. Refused to let anyone touch her. Myrtle warned her that the men downstairs wouldn't be patient forever. "You're pretty," she said, tapping a long fingernail against the doorframe. "Pretty things don't last long if they fight." Then came the 4th night. Through the crack beneath the door, Rosalene saw boots. Not Myrtle's. Not the usual clomp of drunk cowhands. A quiet knock. "Miss Carter?" a man's voice said. She didn't answer. "I heard what happened. I ain't here to hurt you. My name's Thane Rourke. I'm just here to talk." She sat on the edge of the bed, legs trembling. Thane Rourke. She didn't know the name.
But the door opened anyway.
He stepped inside, tall and broad in the shoulders, his hat in his hands, beard trimmed close, shirt dusty from the trail. He looked maybe 30, but his eyes were older. Tired. Careful. "I heard what Myrtle did," he said. "I'm not part of that. I run a cattle spread 5 miles north. I came to town for supplies and caught wind of it." She narrowed her eyes. "Why would you care?" He looked at the floor, then back at her. "Because no woman should be bought and sold like a mule. That ain't right." She stared at him. "I have no money. No family. There's nothing in it for you."
"I know," he said.
"But I got a cabin, a roof. I got 2 ranch hands who mind their manners and more work than I can handle."
"You could come with me."
"I'd pay Myrtle what she's demanding to let you go." "Why?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her with quiet, steady eyes. Then he said, "Because I would rather burn this whole town to the ground than leave you here another night." Rosalene's throat caught. She didn't trust him.
Couldn't.
But something in his voice, low and sure, with no hunger in it, made her want to. "How much is she asking?" "Too much," he said. "But I brought it." Her hands tightened around the edge of the bed. "Then get me out."
He did.
Myrtle didn't argue when she saw Thane's coin. She just laughed and said, "She's yours now, cowboy. Hope she's worth the trouble." Rosalene walked out with nothing but her dress and her boots. Thane helped her onto his horse like she was made of glass, then rode with her under the stars, one hand steady on the reins, the other never once brushing her. It was nearly dawn when they reached his ranch, a simple log house with a wide porch, chickens in the yard, and a barn set against the hills. He let her inside, lit a lamp, and showed her a room with a narrow bed and a wash basin. "You can sleep here," he said. "I'll leave water and some bread." She looked up at him. "Are you going to ask anything of me?" He shook his head.
No, ma'am.
"You're safe here. That's all." Then he left her alone. Rosalene sat on the bed and stared at the flame in the lantern, trying to believe it was real, that she wasn't still locked in that saloon, waiting for someone to open the door with cruel hands and lies. She didn't cry until the lamp burned out, and in the days that followed, she watched Thane Rourke with cautious eyes. He worked sunup to sundown, fixing fences, driving cattle, tending the horses. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with kindness. He asked if she wanted to help cook, not demanded it. He never touched her without asking first. By the end of the week, she was eating again, sleeping through the night. She wore a borrowed dress from Thane's late sister's trunk, and her hair no longer hung in knots. One morning, as they gathered eggs side by side, she said, "You could have left me there." "I know," he said. "Why didn't you?" He set the basket down and looked at her, serious. "Because I saw you, and no one else was going to help." She met his gaze, and something settled in her chest. Something warm, something terrifying. She was falling in love with the man who had bought her freedom with coin and earned her heart with nothing but respect. And Thane, though he never said the words, lingered longer in the kitchen now, brought her wild flowers from the hill, smiled when she laughed. They hadn't kissed, hadn't dared, but the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, that said everything. Rosalene Carter had come to Montana as a mail-order bride. She had been betrayed, sold like livestock. But now, she was standing in a quiet kitchen with flour on her hands and a man who looked at her like she was something sacred. And for the first time in her life, she started to believe she might be loved. Rosalene's hands had grown steadier by the time the high country grasses turned thick with green. She rose with the sun now, her bare feet brushing the cool plank floor of the room Thane had given her. The scent of coffee drifted in from the kitchen before she ever opened the door. That morning, she found him outside, kneeling near the corral fence with a hammer and a length of wire. A roan mare stood tethered a few feet away, chewing hay with a lazy flick of her ears. Rosalene stepped down from the porch, wiping her palms on her apron. "That post leaning again?" Thane didn't look up immediately. "Frost heave, most likely. Ground pushes up in winter, settles different come spring." She crouched beside him, watching the way his fingers worked the hammer and wire. "Your mare's limping." "Stone bruise," he said. She stepped wrong, crossing the creek bed. "Ain't bad, but she'll need resting." Rosalene studied the horse for a moment, then said, "If you pull her shoe, I can poultice the hoof. My mother taught me with the mules back home." Thane finally looked at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "I remember how." He pushed to his feet, handed her the small hammer. "Then she's yours for the week." They worked in silence after that, the kind that didn't press or weigh down. She fetched the cloth and willow bark, boiled water in the cookhouse, and wrapped the mare's hoof with practiced care. Thane watched for a moment, arms folded, head tilted slightly. "She trusts you," he said. Rosalene didn't look up. "Animals can tell." "Tell what?" "When someone means them no harm." His mouth twitched into something quiet. "Reckon people can too. Just takes longer." Later that evening, after the horses were fed and the barn doors latched, Rosalene lingered outside. The wind had dropped, and the air smelled of warmed pine and distant smoke. Thane was splitting kindling near the side porch, steady and slow, his shirt damp down the back. She moved to stand beside him, arms crossed. "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" "Company."
A town. People.
He rested the axe against the stump. "Used to. Not lately. She waited, half expecting him to turn and go. But he didn't. He sat on the edge of the step, legs wide, hat tilted back to show the line where his hair lightened in the sun. Rosalene sat beside him, not touching but close enough their shoulders shared the same shadow. "I dreamed last night I was in that room again," she said softly. "But you were there this time. You kicked the door in." He looked over. "Did I?" She nodded. And Myrtle vanished like smoke. For a long while he said nothing. The logs crackled in the stove inside. A night bird called from the cottonwoods. "I buried a sister 5 years back," Thane said finally. "She died carrying a child she never wanted. Man who left her never looked back." Rosalene turned to him, surprised. "She was stubborn," he went on. "Would have fought God himself if she thought he was wrong. I told her not to go east. She went anyway." Rosalene felt the ache in that, the weight of what he hadn't been able to stop. "I think she'd have liked you," he added. Rosalene's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "You don't have to tell me these things." "I know," he said. Then, quieter. "But I want to." They sat until the stars came out, until the chill crept in, and Thane stood to fetch her shawl without being asked. When he draped it over her shoulders, his hands brushed her arms light, careful, but not uncertain. She reached up and held his wrist, just for a beat, then let go. Inside, she lit the lamp in her room, but left the door open behind her. He didn't follow. But she heard his boots pause outside, then move slowly down the hall to his own room.
She slept easier that night.
Not because the fear was gone, but because something stronger was growing in its place. A thread of trust, thin as fishing line, but pulled taut between two people who had nothing to gain from one another but the truth. And in the morning, when she brought him coffee, he took it with one hand and touched the back of hers with the other. Not a claiming, not a promise, just a moment. But it was enough. The creek behind Thane's barn ran swift and cold that June, swollen with snow melt from the peaks. Rosalene knelt beside it with her skirts hitched up past her ankles, sleeves rolled to the elbow, scrubbing a pail of linens against the smooth river stones. The sun hadn't yet climbed above the ridge, and mist clung low over the field grass like breath held in the hush of morning. She worked without pause, wrists aching, the water numbing her fingers. A hawk circled far overhead. Somewhere behind her, a gate creaked open and shut. "You don't need to wash those down here," Thane said, his voice quiet, boots stopping just short of the waterline. "We've got a barrel and board behind the house." Rosalene twisted the linen tight and laid it across a rock to dry. "The light's better here," she said without looking up. "And I like the sound." He crouched beside her, elbows on his knees. "You always do the hardest thing first." Her mouth tugged into a faint smile. "I like to know I can." Thane didn't answer right away. He pulled up a stone and turned it over in his palm, then set it down again. "Joe and Kale were asking about you," he said. "They're wondering if you'll stay past summer." She rinsed the last shirt and leaned back on her heels. "I hadn't decided." "They mean well," he added. "They just don't see many women out here, especially not ones who can hold their own." Rosalene gathered the damp cloths into the pail. "I haven't figured what I am to this place yet."
Or to you.
His shoulders tensed, then eased. "You're not beholden." "I know that." He watched her a moment longer, then stood. "You want to ride later? There's a stand of wild plums up the ridge. Might still be blooming." She hesitated, then nodded once. "I'll wash the pail out after breakfast." That afternoon, they saddled 2 horses and rode west, past the hay field and into the low hills where the grass grew thick between the rocks. The sky stretched wide and pale, clouds trailing like cotton across the blue. Rosalene rode with her spine straight and chin high, her hair wound in a braid beneath her bonnet, dust clinging to the hem of her skirt. When they crested the hill, the trees opened into a patch of scrub plum, white blossoms trembling in the breeze. Thane dismounted first, tying the reins to a low branch. He offered her a hand down, but she swung free on her own. The glades smelled sweet and sharp, the air thick with bees. "They won't fruit this year," Thane said, brushing a blossom between his thumb and forefinger. Frost came late. Rosalene reached for a low branch. "Still beautiful." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She turned, waiting. "I haven't said anything because I didn't want to push," he said. "But I want you to know. If you ever feel you could stay, build something here not because you owe me, but because it's what you want. I'd make room for that." Rosalene let the branch go. The petals floated down between them. "What if I'm not sure what I want?" she asked. "Then I'll wait," he said. "As long as it takes." She stepped forward, close enough to see where sun had browned the ridge of his cheek. "You already gave me more than I had any right to ask for. I didn't do it for gratitude." "I know," she said. "That's why it matters." The wind stirred between them. She reached for his hand, fingers grazing his, then curling and slow. He didn't move, just let her find her own pace. When their palms met, something steadied inside her like a door she hadn't known she'd been holding shut had eased open. "I'm scared," she whispered. "You don't have to be." She looked up at him, eyes clear. "But I still am." He brought her hand to his chest, just once. Not to press, only to anchor her there. "Then I'll stay right here," he said. "Until you're not." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But they stood in the grove until the sun began to drop behind the hills, and the bees quieted, and the wind turned cool. And when they rode back, her horse paced beside his like they'd done it 100 times before. Rosalene stood in the loft of the barn, brushing dust from her skirts as evening slanted through the slats in long, golden spears. Below, Thane was hauling a new saddle onto the rail, shoulders dipped against the weight. She watched him a moment before descending the ladder, boots careful against the rungs. "I want to learn to ride properly," she said, voice steady. Thane paused, hand settling on the worn leather. "You already ride well enough. I want to saddle and bridle myself. Know how to handle a horse in trouble, not just sit atop one like freight." He studied her, then nodded once. "All right, we'll start with the mule. She's less likely to toss you if you pull wrong." She spent the next hours in the pasture, sleeves rolled, hands chafed from the leather strap. Thane corrected her only when needed, never stepping in unless she asked. When the mule shifted and jerked, Rosalene kept her grip and talked low until the animal settled. By dusk, her arms ached, but the bridle lay snug, her own hands having shaped it into place. Thane leaned against the fence. "You're not easy on yourself." "I've been easy with too many things," she said, brushing hair from her brow. "That's how I ended up in Dry River." He didn't speak for a while. The mule wandered to the trough, and the wind stirred the dry grass along the fence line. "Myrtle sent someone," he said finally. Rosalene turned slowly. "When?" "Yesterday. Joe turned him off the property. Said he was from Miles City. Asked if you were still alive." Her fingers curled against her skirt. "Was he law?"
No.
Looked like a hand.
Said he was owed for something.
Didn't say what. Rosalene stared toward the horizon, where the sun dipped behind pine ridges. "They're trying to find out if I'm worth dragging back. Then they'll have to drag me, too." She looked at him, surprised by the edge in his voice. "If anyone comes again," he continued, "they'll leave empty-handed. I've got every paper I need to prove you're here by choice." "I haven't said that yet." His jaw shifted, but he didn't look away. "I know." The silence stretched, not cold, but waiting. "I didn't come here to be saved," she said. "And I didn't take you in to own you." Rosalene stepped forward, halting in front of him. "I don't want to be someone you protect out of guilt or pity." "I don't feel either," he said. "Not when I look at you." She reached up, fingers brushing his collarbone where the shirt hung open. "Then what do you feel?" He didn't move, but his breath deepened. Like I've been waiting for a woman who sees the worst of me and still chooses to stand close. Her hand lowered, resting against his chest. I'm not ready to choose anything yet. He nodded, slow. That's yours to say. That night, she found a folded piece of paper on the table. It was a deed, signed and witnessed, granting her half ownership of the ranch's front pasture and the 2 horses she'd helped tend since her arrival. She stared at it a long time, then left it where it was. When dawn came, she was out in the yard before the rooster, tossing feed to the chickens, her braid tied tight. Thane passed by with a wheelbarrow and didn't speak, only tipped his hat. But as he walked on, his stride was lighter. And behind her ribs, something shifted again, less like fear, more like beginning. The days warmed, and by mid-July the high trails were dry enough for cattle drives. Thane had started talking about moving a dozen yearlings up to graze along the North Ridge, where the grass grew thick beneath the shelter of fir trees. It would take at least a week. He trusted Joe and Cale to handle the herd, but Rosalene noticed the way he lingered over the maps, tracing the old trails with his thumb. She found him in the shed, oiling the cinch straps before sunset. His brow was drawn, quiet in a way she hadn't seen before. You thinking of going with them? She asked, stepping through the open doorway. I was, he said, not looking up. But I keep thinking about that man Myrtle sent. If there's more like him, I don't want to be days away. Rosalene leaned against the doorframe. I don't need guarding. I know, he said, then paused. But I don't like the thought of you here alone. I'm not alone, she said. Cale's got a steady hand, and Joe watches the road like a hawk. Thane wiped his hands clean, set the rag aside. I've been weighing what matters more, the cattle or the ground I've built something on. She stepped closer. You've already decided. He turned, eyes meeting hers. I won't leave this place unless you ride beside me. The air between them shifted. For the first time, she saw something in his expression, not just careful or kind, but certain. I've never been asked to share anything, she said. Not a home, not a future. I'm asking now, Thane said. Not because I owe you, not because of what you've been through, but because I want to build something that's ours. She studied his face, the way the light caught the lines near his mouth, the way his hands didn't reach for her until she moved first. I want that, she said softly. I want to stay. Not just because I'm safe here, but because I feel more myself than I ever have. He stepped forward, and this time, when he touched her, it was the full weight of his palm against her cheek. She leaned into him, her hand tracing the edge of his jaw, and when they kissed, it was slow, like neither of them needed to rush toward something they already trusted would last. They married 2 weeks later, beneath the cottonwoods where the creek forked. Cale stood beside Thane, stiff in a borrowed coat, and Joe brought a pie instead of flowers. The preacher came from a nearby ranch, old and soft-spoken, hands shaking as he opened the worn Bible. Rosalene wore a dress she'd sewn herself, pale blue with pin-tucked sleeves. She didn't carry a bouquet. She didn't need to. Thane looked at her like she was already everything he'd ever hoped for. Afterward, they shared bread and coffee with the hands and the preacher, and as the sun dipped low, Thane pulled her close in the quiet of the barn, arms around her waist. We could build a second room, he murmured, if we're thinking about a family. Not yet, she said, smiling against his chest. But one day. He rested his chin atop her head. I'll wait for that, too. Years passed, and the ranch held through dry summers and deep snows. They added a second barn, a smokehouse, and a stretch of orchard along the southern edge where the soil was softest. Rosalene taught herself to preserve peaches and smoke venison. Thane began carving small toys in the evenings, whittling by the fire without saying why. When their daughter was born in the spring of 1882, they named her Clara, after Rosalene's mother. She came into the world early and loud, but healthy, with eyes the color of creekstone. Rosalene held her that first night and whispered, "You were wanted long before we ever spoke your name." Thane built her a cradle with dovetail joints and carved wildflowers into the side rails. Every night, he checked the latch on the door 3 times before blowing out the lamp. Myrtle never sent another man. Dry River shrank after fire took half the saloon. No one came asking for Rosalene again, and in time, her name became just another part of the land she belonged to. They grew older with grace. The lines on Thane's face deepened, and Rosalene's braid turned silver at the temples. But they worked side by side, every step forward earned, every silence shared with ease. In the evenings, they sat on the porch with Clara asleep inside, the chickens quiet in the yard, and the scent of cut hay drifting in on the wind. Rosalene would sometimes reach for his hand without looking, and he would squeeze hers once, never more than that. It was all they needed. They had built something rare, a life not born from rescue, but from choice. A home not made of timber and nails, but of steady trust and the kind of love that grows in quiet places, where roots run deep. And in all the long years that followed, neither one of them ever had to wonder again if they were alone.